Hello. I'm live. I'm a living. Welcome. Welcome. Good Tuesday. That sounds like a holiday or something instead of a greeting. Good afternoon or evening or morning. I don't think anyone's watching this in the morning. We gather here again today to be nerds. All me and 0 viewers at this moment. Yes. With my glass of thematically colored drink. It's wine and I just put ice in it because I didn't learn anything about wine when I was in France. Hello, Emma. Anyways, as you get here and as you watch this later on, maybe you should tell me how you're doing, how quarantine season is going. Also, hi Hannah, I can't believe you were a full minute late, and I appreciate your apology. Also, like, no obligation to do this, you know? Just, like, do whatever you want. Watching Polygon, of course. Anyways. I've been doing... Okay, I'm in quarantine, like, stuck in my room quarantine. So... yeah, that's been fun. But that's almost over, so I can go in the rest of my house instead of just my room soon. Which will be exciting. But also, I'm ready to see real life people and not just be stuck in the house. But we do what we got to do. And we stream book readings to replace face-to-face conversation. Anyways, summary time. I was about to ask what video games have y'all been playing, but I know the answer to everyone that is in the chat at this moment. I mean, I think maybe everyone's either playing Animal Crossing, or if you're Hannah Wilkes, you're playing Hollow Knight. Anyways, summary time. We had more of a view of the faceless old woman's childhood, which sounds like an oxymoron to say, but she doesn't have a name, really. We got introduced to Albert, who is... or we got introduced to Edmund, who is her father's assistant, and also me. We got introduced to Albert, who is her childhood friend. We once again encountered this sort of shambling man, and these boats with labyrinths on their flags. And she was questioning her father's honesty because he was obviously lying. And yeah, he was just about to tell her what his real job was. Maybe it's a crime job, doing crimes. And let's see, what am I playing? Before we start, let me answer this viewer question. I'm also playing Hollow Knight. When I'm not playing Hollow Knight, because sometimes I like to do other things because I've already played Hollow Knight and I'm too excitable, I guess. I'm playing the Talos Principle, which is interesting. It really got my attention when I first started playing. Now it's kind of like, yes, we get it. You want to talk about artificial life and artificial intelligence and religion. Wonderful. Do you want to do anything else? I'm also playing it in, it's a puzzle game. The puzzles are sometimes fun. Sometimes they're just like too easy at this point. And I feel like pacing is weird, particularly for me, because there's a lot of text that is given to you. And I'm playing it in French because I need to be practicing French. And so it takes me a long time to read, and that just feels like kind of a drag, but I feel like I need to read because I'm practicing French. So I feel like the pacing is weird with that because it's like, oh, I want to read a bunch. But also I just like want to solve puzzles. I don't know. Pacing is always weird, especially with like text in games. Like Pyre is one of my favorite games in the world. And it's like very divided between like playing a game and there's literally just like an in-game book that you read. And I love both parts of that, but it's an awkward balance and it doesn't feel quite natural. And I'm kind of feeling that with the Talos Principle too. And yeah, it really feels like there needs to be a reason why these two things are combined. Like, why not just make a novel that's Pyre? And there are reasons for that. I don't know. But right now, Talos Principle is just kind of like in this weird spot. But it also keeps doing weird things, which is kind of the only thing that's really keeping me hooked right now. Yes. Anyways, that's all of me blabbering on about video games. Now let's blabber on about books that aren't in video games. So the last chapter ended with, "Very well," he said. "This is my secret." Chapter 4 of An Estate by the Sea. Here is what the sea smells like. It is more texture than scent, because the sea is primarily made of two substances that have no smell of their own: water and salt. Salt has no smell but makes the air sting, and so all of the other smells of the sea are layered upon the pang of salt. Water has no smell, but instead a comfort. We feel moisture as life, and so the smells of the ocean are layered upon the contentment of water. Salt is treble, and water is bass. I don't know how I know this is true, but I know it is true. The sea smells like old wood and wet leaves, like cold mud and warm stone, like every creature who has ever lived in it, a churning graveyard and nursery, like winds from the island carrying the hot circulation of life, and winds from the ocean carrying the distant froth of waves against ships and islands. Like gray, only more so. Like blue, only less so. A deep note of rot mixes with the sterile cleanliness of soughing, and the result, a muddle of clear and foam, smells so much like itself that an old woman who hasn't smelled it in years, living in a desert town with no water at all, an uncrossable distance from the sea, smelling it faint on the breeze, will stop and cast back to her life on an estate by the sea. And for her, it will smell like childhood. That is what the sea smells like. My father was a smuggler. He and Edmund, his business partner, had been running a smuggling business since before I was born, and my mother had died. It wasn't always this way, he said. Your mother's family had money. They did not work, and the fortunes dwindled with age. By the time they died, we had far more property than wealth. There weren't the funds to keep up the grounds or pay the staff. But you were born, child. The orange groves were filled with weeds. The gardens were tangles of overgrowth. Your mother and I didn't know what to do. I had no money of my own, no prospects, and there was no good way then or now for a woman to make a fortune in this narrow-minded country. He guided me to the window and gestured toward the sea. Then, one day, looking out this very window, I realized our salvation. The sea would save us. Our little bit of the sea, he said. Our cove. I looked out past his pointing finger. Yes, our cove. Difficult to find without a guide, but deep enough for a small ship, sheltered against storms. In the old days, your mother's family used to house their yacht. Amid a literal sea of fishers and merchants, your mother's family lived a life of privilege and comfort. They owned no business, generated no new wealth. They simply enjoyed that which they had. The money outlived your grandparents, but not your mother and I. We sold the yacht before you were born, along with jewels and art, no longer befitting our common status. I was good at selling and delivering goods, and I realized that our beautiful hidden cove could be perfect for smuggling. But I didn't know the first thing about smuggling. I needed help. Uncle Edmund, I said. He was a smuggler? My father laughed. No, my daughter. Edmund is an accountant. He shook his head affectionately, but a crooked one. He helped us through tough times, utilizing creative mathematics. He helped us through tough times, utilizing creative mathematics. I love that. I came to him with an idea. I would provide the perfect landing spot for smugglers, and an expertise in the local conditions and currents. He would find people interested in having their goods brought in without passing through the heavy taxes and duties of the port. Such people, it turns out, were not difficult to find. And so gradually, our business grew. Edmund finds clients, helps with the movements of goods beyond our estate, and finds ways to hide our income from government inspectors. And I safely bring the ships in and out of the cove. Often, when I am away on business, I am actually away. We must ensure that the goods reach their owner safely and secretly, and that overland travel is sometimes quite far. But there are times, yes, that I pretended to be away so I can work secretly at the cove on the arrival of a large shipment of merchandise. I apologize for lying to you. It breaks my heart every time, but it is only for your protection. I couldn't tell you why I would need to be awake out all night and asleep during the day, and I didn't want you near any of the sailors. Are they dangerous? I asked, worried for the only parent I had left, but also a little excited at the prospect. No, he said, but acts of crime tend to make even harmless people nervous, and nervous people can be unpredictable. He shook his head. Enough for now. The truth has been told. This is all too much for a young child. Let's get back to our lunch. But I wasn't hungry anymore. I was excited and scared. I couldn't decide which. Years passed, as they do. I was 9, then 10, and then 11. These were the last few years of true happiness I had left, although I had no way of knowing that at the time. My father continued to go on business trips, although he no longer pretended to leave when receiving a shipment. He would only forbid me to go outside after sunset, and ask me to be in charge of my own meals the next day. I would sit in my window all night, anxiously waiting for his return, and so was always as sleepy as he was the next morning. I looked at Edmund in a new light. Before, he had always been a purely friendly, goofy presence full of jokes and games. He still was, but now I had the context of his job, and my respect for him deepened. Here was a man who could go out into the kingdom of Europe, offering smuggling services to all sorts of low characters, and returned to play backgammon with me at our kitchen table, attempting to cheat in intentionally obviously in excuse me, in intentionally obvious ways so that I could catch him and berate him, which amused us both. Over one of these games, when I was 9, I stopped, unsure of how to say what I wanted to say. "It's your turn, little one," he said. "Or do you want me to take another?" "Is my father safe?" I asked abruptly, having failed to find a way to ease into the subject. "Will my father be okay when he goes out to, do his work?" Edmund grew serious and pushed the board game aside. "I will never let any harm fall upon your father," he said, in a solemn voice. "And I will never let any harm fall upon you," he smiled. "Anyways, your father does the easy stuff. He'll be fine. I'm the one always sticking my neck out. Now, are you going to take your move or what?" Albert and I continued to meet and play regularly. He asked sometimes about my father, and about the rumors, but I never answered one way or the other, preferring to change the subject by poking him or daring him to do some foolish act of bravery off on off one of the old crumbling buildings of the estate. Eventually, he understood that I would not say more than I had, and he stopped asking, and our friendship again became one of childhood joy and games, and silence about any subject that could distract us from that. Of course, I regularly tried to talk to my father for more information about what he did. I wanted so badly to be of use, but he grew uncharacteristically stern about the subject. I would only shake his head. I never gave up, for I loved and admired my father, and knew that any work he did was work that I one day would do too. Awkward glances to chapter 1. What does that mean? Does that mean, ah, someday too I shall do crime? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would exactly call it the faceless old woman who secretly lives in your home. I don't know if I would call that crime. It's not like a prototypical crime. Like, she could obviously get arrested from it if she was a physical being that was only in one place and not in everyone's homes simultaneously. Um, anyways. Also, yeah, whenever somebody says, "Oh, nothing bad, I'm not gonna let anything bad happen to you," you're like, here comes tragedy. Anyways, also shoe murder. Yeah. I mean, yeah. She does like crime, but she's such a like um all present and escaping person that it's like, I don't know. I don't think of it as crime to like do like jam car glass into someone's car ignition. I don't know. I also, speaking of the name Craig, all the Craigs I know, which isn't honestly that many, are like very nice and like genuinely good people. Though no Craig I know has particularly good style, so perhaps that's why. Indeed, why indeed, she burned all his shoes. Anyways, digressions aside. A change in our routine comes suddenly, late in my 11th year. It was a night that my father had set to receive a shipment. He had let me stay up with him as he waited, but when it arrived, he put me in my bedroom and forbade me to leave. I, as ever, sat awake at my window, waiting for him to come back inside so that we could both rest. I could hear the mindless babble of the waves, and perhaps, although it might have been my imagination, the creak of wood from the bandit ship that I knew was anchored in our cove. Generally, this was all I ever heard or saw on these nights. The transaction done so quietly and quickly that no trace of it was noticeable, even from our own estate. That night, however, was different. I heard alarm shouting loud enough to risk alerting the inhabitants of neighboring estates. I rushed out of my room and out of the house without thought or hesitation. I would figure out how to help when I got to the cove. My father was all I had, and I would give up everything, down to my own life, to preserve him. I raced barefoot through the fields towards the water, but some instinct made me duck behind a small rise before I got close to the source of the shouting, and from this hidden place I observed my father, surrounded by the crew of bandits from the ship. They were the same group I had seen before with my father, but the circumstances were different this time. The man with the scarred cheek was holding a knife to my father's throat. My father stood tall, unshaking, maintaining eye contact with his assailant. "I have no money here," he said. The bandits jeered at him, and the man with the scarred cheek pressed the knife into my father's neck. "An estate this rich," the man said. His voice gave me a lurch in the gut, because it was not the voice of a man who is acting on a whim, but a man serious and set on a goal and intent on achieving it. "And you a smuggler for all these years? Don't lie to me, or I will cut your tongue out before I gut you. If there is no money in this home, then there will also be no life." Before my father could reply in a way that might cause him harm, I took a large rock from the ground and hurled it with great accuracy, born of years of dares and games with Albert, and practicing darts, as one must do during the COVID virus quarantine time. The rock thumped dully against the man's head, and he collapsed, dropping the knife. The other bandits were confused, having clearly been rallied by their leader and unsure what to do without his motivation. My father immediately set himself upon them, increasing the confusion. I sprang forward, dashing for the knife. The man with the scarred face was dazed but awake. Blood ran down his face. He pawed about in the grass, his fingers battling for the hilt, trying to get a grip. I made it to the blade first, and without thinking, fumbled it into my hands, and in the same motion drove it toward the man with the scarred face. I struck something and heard a scream. The other men fled, and my father, bruises and blood visible now upon his face, scooped me up in a tight embrace. I looked down at the man with the scarred face, where I had stabbed in the thigh. He was bleeding from two different places, and looking up at me with a fierce hatred. Edmund had rushed to the estate as soon as a messenger from my father had delivered the news. Seeing my father's swollen, reddened face, Edmund said in a light-hearted voice full of mock exasperation, "I suppose we have to find a new crew." My father sighed, and Edmund gave me a large hug and a laugh. "I'm glad you're both okay." Even in his joking, Edmund was right. They had used this crew for years, and I trusted them. My father and he would have to start over finding a new group of Confederates, and also now had learned to temper their trust in those who come from the world of banditry. My father was quiet. He watched me with deep consideration. He had made sure I was physically unharmed, and then he had warmed some chocolate over the fire for me, which I now drank with the simple joy of a child who is awake past her bedtime and drinking chocolate on that man. It felt natural to me. This may have been the first sign of my vocation, although I did not recognize it as such. My father perhaps did, as he looked me over with deep thought and care. "I suppose," he said, "it is time for you to learn more about the business." "Really?" I said with happiness. "Really?" Edmund said with surprise. "You didn't see how she handled herself out there," my father said to Edmund. She showed foresight. She was quick. This won't be the last situation like this. We can no longer ignore the dangers of my business. And if my daughter is to be around this kind of danger, then I would rather she be prepared." "It would be less dangerous," Edmund said, with the tone of someone bringing up an argument that's course had run for years, "if we partnered with the Duke's own, let them take the risk." "We are not pairing up with those assassins and thieves," my father said in the same tone. "We may be criminals, but we are honest criminals. We are honest criminals. I won't let my family name mix with an organization involved in murder, banditry, slavery, and who knows what else." On the many nights my father had left me alone, I had taken to reading books in his small library. I knew all about the Duke's Own. They were a notorious syndicate of pirates, racketeers, and swindlers. Their reach was vast, covering Europe, Russia, and northern Africa. The Duke of the Duke's Own was a myth, a sleight of hand played by whichever pirate was handy when they needed a figurehead or a phantom for authorities to fruitlessly pursue. In actuality, the membership made decisions through general election, and in this way the organization was far more democratically run than any government on the continent. Still, the Duke's Own was also a brutal organization that poached small farms, abusing and often killing innocent people who dared to defend all that they owned. The Duke's Own had politicians, military leaders, bankers, and merchants as members. The deeper their roots, the more secure their operations. I could understand Edmund's strategy for joining such a powerful group. They could protect us not only from smaller criminals, like the ones who attacked my father, but also even larger, more frightening groups, like the mysterious Order of the Labyrinth. If we made the right political connections, the Duke's Own could even protect us from the possibility of prison. But my father was adamant, and Edmund backed off. "Perhaps one of these days you will change your mind," sighed Edmund. "I will not have my daughter connected to a corporation of murderers and plunderers." "Enough!" My father turned to me. "We must learn to protect ourselves from such people, not become them. Tomorrow, we begin your education." Shoot. Also, my computer is about to die. Let's see. Okay, I'm just gonna finish this chapter. And hopefully my computer doesn't die in the middle of that. I learned first the complete structure of my father and Edmund's smuggling operation. Their clients were the owners of merchant ships and pleasure yachts, bringing in fruit and spices and gold and cloth from ports in the east, or from Morocco or Egypt. A close eye was kept on these shipments, because the various squabbling kingdoms of Europe all wanted their share of any goods passing through their ports. On the other hand, the Mediterranean was thick with bandit ships, and no eyebrows were raised at the occasional shipment of goods lost to pirates, a cost of doing business. But of course, the bandits were my father and Edmund's bandits, and they did not take by force. They tied on peacefully to ships who had prepared for their arrival, and whose crew helped the bandits with the transfer of cargo. Then the bandits took the cargo to our cove, where it was unloaded and transported by land back to its owners, minus a cut for the smugglers. The bandits enjoyed the situation too, since there was much less risk of violence and injury boarding a ship that wanted you aboard, and much less risk of jail, since the ships always waited a considerate amount of time before reporting the attacks. Edmund and my father had underestimated the bandits' greed, but the old crew was soon replaced with a new one, more carefully vetted and with less of a violent reputation, who, for the time being at least, seemed content with their roles. My father hired mercenaries to guard the estate for a year or so, in any case of the old crew returning seeking revenge, but nothing happened, and eventually he decided he couldn't justify the expense, and we returned to our old way of living. Along with the details of the business, I learned much of the trade from my father, and from Edmund, and from the crews whom, as I became involved in the business, I was allowed to interact with more. They treated me as a novelty, and from them I learned, unbeknownst to my father, how to pickpocket, how to open locks, and several other such tricks. I would make Albert act as my test subject, keeping a cork in his pocket all day while I would try and steal it as we went about our games. Albert never again brought up the rumors about my father, and I would have denied them if he had. But I could see in his eyes he knew they weren't merely rumors. For the first year or so, Albert caught me every time, but eventually I was able to regularly slip the cork out without his noticing. He tried to learn as well, through my second-hand lessons, but he never could find the aptitude. I discovered great satisfaction in these new skills. I would sit for hours in front of the old back door, practicing breaking into the lock until my fingers ached for the keyhole, and the keyhole was fogged with perspiration from my nostrils. Edmund, who networked with the wealthy and criminal alike, taught me much about the art of persuasion and manipulation. Nothing must ever be your idea, he explained. If I want you to go to bed, and I tell you to, you'll rebel. But if we simply set up a situation in which you'll have the idea to go to bed yourself, then you will go with satisfaction, thinking you have won, even as you do exactly what I wanted you to. Remember that, because it will get you far in life. Short-lived pride at winning a disagreement is a fool's game. It is far better to let the other side think they have won, as they coincidentally decide to do what you wanted all along. He winked at me, and then tried to switch 2 pieces on the backgammon board, and laughed when I slapped his hands. For my father's part, he wanted me to be able to protect myself, and so taught me how to use a knife. I soon became adept with all sorts of defensive and offensive uses of a small blade, and I would, with my father's consent, practice fighting with a crew using short lengths of wood, until I was soon besting even the most skilled of them. I think my father allowed this practice because he wanted them to think of me always as potentially very dangerous. But even my father did not understand the full potential of how dangerous I would become. Whee! That's all for today. That was only 1 chapter, but it was a longer chapter, I guess. But my computer is going to die. But let's read comments first, before I leave forever. Also, I don't know if I will be streaming tomorrow. I might be helping people move at this time, but I will probably still be streaming because I probably shouldn't be helping people when I could potentially be sick, and it's like at the end of my quarantine, so it's kind of in the air. Oh, how long do I have on my quarantine? It ends tomorrow, sort of. Yes. It is the time. Father of the Year award, crime out of 10. Shoe murder. I understand that reference. Oh, yes. The darts. Yeah, honest criminals. You've been criminals for generations, Gerald. All the crime, all the freaking crime in the world. Yes. Thank you everybody for coming. My computer is literally telling me it is going to turn off. So I'm gonna blast. Have a good rest of your day. Stay inside. Tell me how you're doing. Bye.